טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה 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 טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. Please turn to page 12 for Lachuna Ranana. Sing out to God, the maker of all, sure and strong. Let all of creation, from mountain to sea, hear our song. Let God's light, we rejoice from all of our hearts to hear God's voice.
That is the perfect psalm to begin our day. our Shabbat together because it is a splendid day and it's a splendid evening. I'm looking up, I see about 3/4 of a moon, maybe a little bit less than that. The sky is perfectly blue, the wind is blowing. To be outside and welcome Shabbat is truly a gift. I'm happy to be here with our cantorial intern Andrew Pascal and Tali Tadmore and Jeff Stern over there with music. And all those who are joining us online, we welcome you. And perhaps you can't fully grasp the flavor of this spectacular day with the blue sky, but we bring you a little bit of California sunshine. If you're on a different coast, we're happy to have you with us. We continue on page 10 at the bottom of the page with Shabbat HaMalkah. Those words were written by Chaim Nachman Bialik about 100 years ago, and they find their way into our worship service, a poem for Shabbat.
Hachama merosh ha'ilanot nistalka bo v'neitzei likrat Shabbat HaMalka hinehi yoredet hakdosha habrucha Ve'ima malachim tzeva shalom umenucha boi boi hamalka boi boi hakala shalom Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaShalom.
We continue with the candle lighting on page 2. I'd like to invite the congregation to rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner Shel Shabbat.
You can be seated. We continue with Lecha Dodi on page 20. As we reach the last verse, we'll rise and turn and face what amounts to our entrance over there, and we bow to the left and the right as we welcome Shabbat. Page 20.
Lecha Dodi, Yalalai Likrat Kala, Yalalai B'nei Shabbat, B'nei Shabbat Nekah, Yalalai Lecha Dodi, Yalalai Likrat Kala, Yalalai B'nei Shabbat, B'nei Shabbat Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad v'hishmiyanu el hamiyuchad Adonai echad לקראת שבת, לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נשואה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תהילה, לה 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 לך אדוני, יאללה לה 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 לקראת כלה, יאללה לה 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 בני שבת, בני שבת נקבלה. Please rise. בואי ושלום, אל תרד בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לה לה לה, יאללה לה 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 לך אדוני, יאללה לה 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 לקראת כלה, יאללה לה 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 בני שבת, בני שבת נקבלה, לה 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 לך אדוני, יאללה לה 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 לקראת כלה, יאללה לה 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 בני שבת, בני שבת נקבלה.
We continue on page 128 with the Baruch Hu. Please remain standing.
Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Lai 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 lai.
Beautiful reading on page 31. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai Ma'ariv Aravim. The Shema is on page 34.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad. מלכותו לעולם, לעולם ועד.
Please be seated. In the shadow of the violence this week, it is all too easy to fall into profound despair. And our prayer book brings us the Micha Mocha. And what we have to remember is that our people have been singing this song, reciting this prayer, imagining not just the story we tell of redemption from Egypt, but also our hope that the world will continue to get better. And so in its words comes memory and aspiration. And there's a reading on 39 I want to share that in a poet's vision captures that dual nature of life, that we both live with the knowledge of the real world and the pain we carry and refuse to give up the aspiration for the world that can yet be. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth. The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and love. From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nation shall be one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea. Page 40.
Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha Netar B'Kodesh Nora Tehilot Osei Feleh Nora Tehilot Osei Feleh Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha Netar B'Kodesh Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha Netar B'Kodesh.
The traditional words of Hashkivenu are on page 42, but this is a bit of a mashup, if you will, in a nice kind of a way, with new music by Craig Taubman, not that new, but newer, and brought together with the words of the song by Matisyahu. So I invite you to both enjoy it, but to also listen carefully to how the words work together, and if you want, take a moment to even look at the English words and how Matisyahu's words kind of capture the flavor of the Hashkivenu.
Sometimes I lay under the moon. I thank God I'm breathing. And then I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more war, and our children will play one day, one day, one day. Oh, one day, one day, one day. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu shomrei, nu lechayim. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, v'hamidenu shomrei, nu lecha. One day this all will change, treat people the same, stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll all be free and proud to be under the same sun, singing songs of freedom like one day, one day, one day. Whoa, one day, one day, one day.
Page 44, Vishamru, a reminder that throughout the ages, our people have kept Shabbat as a precious gift, a time when we are reminded not just of the moments of rest, but also of a world that can be, a world when people gather in love, and when people gather in support and friendship, a world where we can say Shabbat Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, and mean it and know that peace will one day prevail. Page 40.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam, berit olam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti oti leolam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti oti leolam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai, asa Adonai, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, uvayom hashvi'i Shavat, Shavat, vayinafash. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti oti leolam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti oti leolam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam, berit olam.
Our prayers for healing are on page 253. When we offer these prayers, we offer them in the spirit that miracles are far and few between, but with the knowledge that, in the poet's words, prayer may not bring water to parched fields, but prayer can water an arid soul. And we hope that our prayers both provide comfort for us, and perhaps we let those know for whom we're praying that we prayed for them today, give them strength and comfort amidst their illness. So hold on to in your hearts thoughts of those who are ill as we sing these words of healing.
Mi sheberach avoteinu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
The amidah begins on page 46 and it goes all the way through to page 62, but it's not a race. You don't have to get to the end. You can stop along the way and read the words of poetry on the left page or the words of prayer on the right page, or you can simply take a moment to look out the window if you're home, to close your eyes, to appreciate the warm breeze tonight, to look at the flowers blooming, the trees, to listen for the birds chirping, to appreciate the world we're in, to let your prayers be your own free expression of what's in your heart. I invite you to rise. When you're finished, you may be seated.
Shalom Rav is on. Oh, I don't actually have a page for that. Never mind. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. 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 tasim leolam, tasim leolam.
Malka is lost at sea when her sailboat capsizes. A fishing boat comes alongside and offers to rescue her, and she waves it away and she says, "God will save me." A helicopter hovers overhead and the Coast Guard is dropped down on a cable. Malka waves the helicopter away and she says, "God will save me." Before leaving, the Coast Guard helicopter drops a raft, and the raft inflates, and it's sitting next to Malka. She pushes it away. "God will save me." Surprise, she dies of exposure. She finds herself before the Holy One, and she implores the divine, "God, I have had faith in you all my life, and when I finally found myself in need, I waited, and you didn't save me." And God says, "I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter and a Coast Guard. I sent you," you get the point. And there it is. That's the difference between hope and optimism. Writing for The Atlantic, Harvard Kennedy School social scientist Arthur Brooks, not the actor, but the writer, not Albert Brooks, Arthur Brooks, emphasized that hope and optimism are actually two quite different ways of encountering the world. And we have to face it. In our world, having either hope or optimism sometimes is a bit of a challenge. So recognizing that these two states of being are actually different, I want to talk about the distinction. My opening story, Malka, is an example of someone who sacrificed hope on the altar of optimism. Her optimism held that God was going to swoop down and save her in one great act of metaphysical grace. And in that fantasy of optimism, she missed those less glorious, incremental opportunities for salvation. Now look, a certain amount of optimism is important, but naive or absolute optimism often reduces the opportunity for the small steps that hopefulness can actually offer. So in Brooks' words, optimism is the belief that things will turn out all right regardless of evidence to the contrary. Hope, on the other hand, makes no such assumption, but it's a conviction that one can act to make things better in some way. So I'm going to give you a stark, real-life example of how that dynamic between hope and optimism plays itself out in someone's life. Many years ago, I was summoned to the bedside of a young 40-year-old woman who'd been fighting ovarian cancer for years. Before I entered her room, the social worker pulled me aside and said, I had the conversation with her. I told her that there's no more that we can do. So I entered the room expecting to find a distraught woman crying in bed. She'd be leaving 2 young kids, a husband, her dreams. Instead, I walked in to see her sitting cross-legged on the bed. She had put on makeup. She even changed out of her hospital clothes. And in all honesty, she looked great. We chatted a bit, and I carefully looked for an opening to begin that end-of-life conversation with her gently that I thought she might want to have. But every time I got close, she steered away. And she finally said, I'm not going to die. I'm going to beat this thing. You know what happened. Painfully, a month later, she died. Now, some of you might be thinking, that's incredible spirit. She refused to give up. That's the best state of mind. Well, I'm here to suggest something to the contrary. That based on Brooks' essay and his research, and my own experience, that unqualified, unmediated optimism might not be the best way to face life's challenges. Both our personal challenges, but also those things that plague our world. Hope, on the other hand, offers a prudent and, in fact, maybe even more sustainable course. Hope is about acknowledging the real circumstances of a situation. Hope is a state of mind that says, given current reality, what can I do to make the best of what I've got? Now, that young woman that I encountered all those years ago, she did eventually moderate her optimism with hope. And her interactions with her family over the last weeks of her life were powerful and ultimately transforming and enriching. So, while facing life's challenges with the realism of hope can actually be transformative. Now, what about the world? We're faced with a plethora of seemingly indomitable challenges. I'm not going to list them. You can do that yourself. An optimist might say, I have a feeling we're going to be all right. We'll get through this. Because after all, everything does work out in the end. And then, when things don't work out in the end, or another incident happens to provide cause for despair, the optimist might become a cynic. Nothing's going to change. This is just the way it is. A cynic is often the frustrated optimist. But what if we look at our world through that lens of hope? And I just want to tell you, this is personal for me, because I read Brooks's essay, and reading it, and I'm sharing it with you because it was so powerful for me, gave me a sense for a little reset on my own outlook on life, especially after we were all accosted by that massacre in Highland Park, that painful, painful massacre. And I had to read the words of my own colleague writing about her congregant that had died. Hope is based in realism. Hope requires a broad understanding of what is actually possible and what isn't. And hope demands action. Incremental, purposeful, potentially meaningful small acts. And that hope versus optimism dynamic distinction plays itself out in our own Jewish foundational story. So if an optimist had written the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the Israelites would have left Egypt, they would have gone straight to the promised land. After all, it's only about a week's journey walking. From liberation to redemption, God saves. But the version that we tell actually negates that kind of optimism. Instead, the Israelites fail again and again and again. They wander, they fall short, they bicker, they even reject God who redeemed them at times. But very slowly, they move forward. Now, it takes them 40 years to traverse that distance that should have taken a week. But when they finally enter the land, they still fail again and again and again. And the Bible itself, our version of the Bible, ends not with some grand vision of redemption, but with the destruction of Jerusalem. Those are the last words of 2 Chronicles, and the exile of its inhabitants. And yet Jews never allowed hope to fail, to realize that one day we could be in the Holy Land. And that last iteration took 2,000 years to realize. So Arthur Brooks suggests 3 mindsets to a hopeful life. He says, first, imagine the future you desire, one that is real, attainable, incremental. Next, consider the steps you have to take to realize that future, knowing you may not succeed fully, and that's okay. And finally, act. Take the small, achievable steps that you can do to make that future you imagine real. Whatever your challenge might be, whether it be personal well-being or managing illness, whether it be tackling social or environmental causes or political circumstances, you needn't really fully suppress your optimism, in all honesty. Because actually, merely to believe in tomorrow at all is a form of optimism. But if we temper that non-specific optimism with the realism of incremental hope, well, that changes our outlook. There are 14 biblical psalms out of 100 and something that begin with the words Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents, kind of like a stairway, ascent, right? Each of them captures an extraordinary optimistic dream or vision of the author. The aspirations in the text of the psalm are almost unattainable. They're optimism. But at some form, before they assumed their presence in our version of the Bible, an editor came along and added the words Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. They weren't in the original versions. They came later. As if to say, if you want to get there, if you want to get to the vision outlined in this psalm, you have to move step by step by step. And so it is with us. To get from here to there, wherever your there is, to get from your here to your there, we have to walk carefully, hopeful step by hopeful step. Amen. We continue with a song of hope, Al Kol Eleh, on page 347 in your books.
Al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, al hamar ve'hamatok, al bitenu hatinok shmor eli hatov, al ha'esh hamevoeret, al hamayim hazakim, al ha'ish hashav habayta min hamerchakim, al kol eleh, al kol Shmor Eli, Eli Hatov, Al Hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, Al Hamar ve'hamatok, Al Nata'akor Natu'ah, Al Tishkach et the honey needs a sting to be complete, and we all must learn to taste the bitter with the sweet. Keep, O Lord, the fire burning through the night and through the day, for the man who is returning from so far away. Al kol eleh, al kol eleh, shmor na li eli hatov, al hadvash ve'al ha'oketz, al hamar ve'hamatok, al nata'akor natu'ah, al tishkach et hatikva, hashiveni ve'ashuva el haaretz hatova.
Al tishkach et hatikva. Don't forget the hope, are the words that Andrew sang. Page 258, you'll see the prayer for our country. I'm going to leave it to you to either read the words in front of you or hold on to your own hopes and prayers for our nation. We each have our own aspirations for what this country can yet be, and take a moment, if you will, to not just hold on to the hope, but ask yourself what your action this week might be to help our nation be what it is yet has yet to be, but will still can become. On Saturday night, I'm getting on a plane with my wife, and we're going to Jerusalem for a week. I'm going to look at some of the organizations that Stephen Wise works with and some of the organizations that are supported by the Los Angeles Federation, and recognize that part of building an Israel that we all also aspire to see is working hard to make those organizations strong. They can do the work they do. So as we sing our prayer for Israel, wish me well on my journey, and I'll carry your hopes and your spirit with me as well to our Holy Land.
Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzor Yisrael v'go'alo, Ba'arech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulateinu.
O Heavenly One, protector and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace, and send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and the fullness of joy for all who dwell there, as we all say, Amen.
Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzor Yisrael v'go'alo, Amen. Selah, Amen. Selah.
The Kaddish is on page 5. Please rise.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav, veratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho, be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lemaaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom tehillah lemikrae kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'acharta v'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. L'chaim.
The Aleinu is on page 282.
Aleinu leshabeach la'adon hakol, la'teit gedula le'otzer bereshit, shelo asanu kigoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, ve'anachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, ve'ne'emar, ve'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo
when I drove up here this week, the 3 flags that we have outside of Katz Pavilion were at half-mast, and I thought to myself, again, they're at half-mast. And what I recognize is that somehow or another we can become a bit complacent, and we say again and we go about our lives. But part of what our function is here is to make sure we don't do that. That when there are injustices in the world, when there are tragedies in the world, that we recognize that all of us in some way are in pain. And so those flags at half-mast are not just for the souls of those who were killed in Highland Park, but they're also for our own souls that are somehow or another afflicted a bit when these kinds of things happen. And so as a memorial, we read their names. Jackie Sondheim, Catherine Goldstein, Irina and Kevin McCarthy, parents of a toddler, Nicholas Toledo, Stephen Strauss, and Eduardo Uvaldo, all folks gathered to observe and celebrate American democracy. What an irony. I now invite those of you who are observing different stages of mourning after a loved one to please rise to recognize, first of all, if you're in the first 30 days of mourning, would you please rise? If you're in the first year of mourning, would you please rise? If you're observing the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death of a loved one, would you please rise? And now we stand beside you in solidarity, both with you in your mourning and also in tribute and honor and memory to those who lost their lives this week. The Kaddish is on page 294. Hitgadal vitkadash shemei rabbah, bi'alma divarach ute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yamechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, b'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mivarach le'olam olamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shmei dekudesha b'richu, le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran bi'ama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to Israel, and all the world, to which we say, Amen. As always at this time, we thank not only our musicians, our cantorial intern Andrew, but also all of our tech staff that helps to work behind the scenes to make sure that our live stream works and our cameras show beautiful pictures and that folks who are watching from home can appreciate our Shabbat services, and we are so happy to have you with us. We conclude with a prayer for peace. Oseh Shalom. The words are at the bottom of page 294.
Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Shabbat Shalom.